All right, Texas has added elite talent on offense. We talked last hour with Sark and heard from Sark talking about his defensive overhaul with Will Muschamp. The analysts and coaches they've added, 43 new players while 40 have walked out the door. But the big portal additions we know were to go more explosive on offense. The more explosive on offense. We know that. And Sark said it was, well, actually, I think we can play this for you. Listen to Sark talking about how tough it was. This is a coach who's played college football. He's developed a lot of good players. And it's tough to see good, as the fans are, watching good players that they've rooted for. Trey Wisner, walk out the door. C.J. Baxter, DeAndre Moore. That's not easy. But here's Sark on, watching good players that were productive for us move on. It's the evolution of college football, but it is difficult.
It's hard to see Trey Wisner leave. It's hard to see Parker Livingstone leave. It's hard to see DeAndre Moore leave or a Cedric Baxter. And again, I'm leaving 24 other guys out, that left our program, and that's probably not fair to those guys. But I also have to remind myself this is college football today, and I know, I'd love for them all to stay, and I'd love for them all to finish what they started here with us. But as much as contrary to maybe popular belief, our money isn't endless here either, and we have to make real decisions.
All right, so real decisions, and that's where we talked to you all the way through this. As this was happening, this is roster allowance, salary allowance, revenue share allowance, and if because Leung Lafau, DeAndre Moore, and certainly Trey Wisner were very productive players, when you go back and renegotiate, you're asking for more. Where Texas is like, well, we'll offer you this because we want to go after Cam Coleman and we want to add more explosion. And in C.J. Baxter's case, we just can't allocate that because we need you to be healthy, and you weren't this year, and we can't hope on that right now. So that Texas is the portal, and they wanted to be aggressive. On the offensive line, which we'll talk about coming up, but really because Sark is a believer, and I think I agree with it too, that explosive players on your offense around your quarterback will make your offensive line's job easier. That's just by nature. We can parallel it to the Cowboys. Acquiring George Pickens and bringing in Javonte Williams made the Cowboys' offensive line better and made their job easier in the National Football League, and they had an offense that averaged over 30 points a game because they were more explosive. They didn't really add, outside of Tyler Booker, anybody on the offensive line. They just played better because, again, job easier. So here's Sark. I want to, let's start with the running backs, Jack, the rebuilt room, because Trey Wisner, C.J. Baxter, others are gone. And in their place, there's a kid from NC State, grew up, big-time recruit out of Charlotte, who ended up at NC State and has been a really productive player, big-time player. And then you also add Raleek Brown, out of Mater Dei High School out in California, who went to Arizona State, and this past year was a 1,000-yard back. Remember Cam Scattaboo?
I do.
Was the running back last year for them, and when Texas had to play them. And this past season, it was, Raleek Brown, who is a big time another. You had to get a top running back prospect from the West Coast and the East Coast in Charlotte. Now their Longhorns have played a couple of seasons of college football, and here's Sark on that rebuilt room.
It hasn't been easy for the past few years. This year was probably the most challenging of them all. We had an opportunity,
in your opinion,
to
let me see if I get this right.
A room that looks crowded on paper with other elite prospects.
I don't know if it's ever easier. I just felt like we had an opportunity to get back to the style of players that fit what we were trying to do. Like I said, at a cost point, everything, there's value on everything. And I think adding Hollywood and adding Raleek, two really versatile players that are explosive players, that can run the style of runs that we like to run, that are very versatile of catching the ball out of the backfield, that have home run hitting ability. We have to get back to being the explosive offense that we're accustomed to being, that those two guys fit. If you would have told me in December that we were going to, or at the new year that we were going to bring in two first-team all-conference players, I probably wouldn't have believed you, but it hit right. And those two guys had the right mentality to come in. And oddly enough, since they've come in, they're probably two of the closest transfers. They've almost become best friends on our team already. Like they understand they need each other. And I think they understand historically for us in our program, We've always, done well when we've had two that could play off of one another. And so it's been a great marriage. Now, that's not to take anything away from a Michael Terry or a Derek Cooper or these other guys that are developing in our program. But to get two experienced players that have done it at a high level in the Power 4 level, all conference type players, I think is going to benefit us, and I think it's going to benefit them in the long run as well.
All right, and Sark is right. I mean, you can go back to Bijan and Roshan. You can go to Jonathan Brooks and C.J. Baxter, right? They like to have the tandem. And this year, quite honestly, they really just had Trey Wisner. And because C.J. Baxter never got healthy, they really didn't have another running back that they could lean on. Jarrett Gibson left the program during the season because of playing time, and he still had the fumbling issues. So, and we're going to do next week, Jack, we're going to start our deep dives. We're going to get some folks on to talk about both of these running backs and just who covered them at Arizona State, covered them at NC State. But you can go watch the film. That's what's great about, high school thing. High school players are one thing because you're playing against high school players. But you can go watch NC State playing other ACC competition and Arizona State against the Big 12. They're running away from people, Jack. They're both big plays waiting to happen. And speaking of big plays, we know the biggest big play addition that the Longhorns have made is Cam Coleman. And interesting yesterday with Sark asked about Cam Coleman, and he didn't know much about him when the whole process began and he entered the portal. And here's Sark on what they've learned and how they ended up with Cam Coleman. For a lot of people in the college football industry, the best and most talented non-quarterback available. You could argue that the tackle from Colorado ended up at LSU, and there's some others, but there weren't many more talented people than Cam Coleman out of Auburn who entered the portal.
When he's arrived, you got to remember Ryan Wingo and Emmett Mosley are both coming off of injuries right now. And so they're not able to do the things that Cam's being required to do, from a fundamental standpoint, from a workouts with Coach Becton, from a skill development standpoint.
Let me start this over. I started at the wrong spot.
I think at the end of the day, Cam has been a fabulous addition so far. And what I knew of Cam Coleman early on was watching Auburn film when I was getting ready to play Oklahoma, or when they're on the tape. I'm like, this guy's really good. This number 8's really good. When he went into the portal, it was like, okay, this is probably going to be a priority for a lot of teams around the country. What type of individual is this guy? And you start making your calls, and you're calling people that have coached him and coached against him. And we never played Auburn, so I didn't get a chance to see him in person. And then you start getting on a phone call, and then you get onto a FaceTime and a Zoom, and then you get him on your campus. And the biggest thing that came out of it for me was what an awesome individual. This kid is an awesome kid. And he hasn't disappointed since he's arrived. And I think one thing that has been unique, when he's arrived, you got to remember Ryan Wingo and Emmett Mosley are both coming off of injuries right now. And so they're not able to do the things that Cam's being required to do, from a fundamental standpoint, from a workouts with Coach Becton, from a skill development standpoint. And for a guy of his caliber, he could say, well, those two guys aren't working today. Maybe I'll take a step back, and maybe I don't need to work today. It's been the total opposite. This guy's going for it. And he came here with real intentions and a real reason of understanding he wants to compete for a national championship, and he wants to put himself in the best position to get ready for the NFL. And he came to a pro-style offense for a reason. We've obviously had a pretty good recent history of receivers getting drafted now into the NFL fairly highly. And so he understands why he came. He understands, hey, I need to put my work in so when those two guys come back and Khalil Lockett continues to develop and Dalen McCutcheon and all these other aspects of our team, that I need those guys to play really well so I don't get double coverage all the time. But they need me to play really well so they don't get double coverage all the time. And surely if we're all playing really good, now the running game can be a lot better because now we're getting split safety defense, and now it's one less guy in the box that – Raleek and Hollywood and Derek and Michael, and it's one less guy that the offensive line has to block. And so the whole thing ties together. And so the understanding that he had of all of that, I think, was probably the most impressive thing to go along with the individual that this guy is. This guy is he's an awesome individual, and I look forward to y'all getting to spend some time with him because I think you're going to be very impressed.
All right, there you go, Cam Coleman. And, in the immediate aftermath of his commitment, Jack, we here on Game Time drew parallels to the Cowboys again. that Camp Coleman was at Auburn with Jackson Arnold and a Hugh Freeze offense. And kind of like George Pickens was stuck in Pittsburgh with a bad quarterback and a stodgy offense.
A series of bad quarterbacks.
Well, look what George Pickens did when he got to the Cowboys, and look what it did for the Cowboys. And we know they have defensive challenges that Texas shouldn't have with the players and Will Muschamp. But you saw, as he just said, more too high safety look because, man, defensive backs are like, what do I do with Pickens? We've really drawn the parallel that George Pickens is a lot like the style of player Cam Coleman is, 50-50 balls or 80-20 balls. And Ryan Wingo's strength is a lot like CeeDee Lamb's, kind of a running back with the ball at wide receiver. Get him the ball and catch and run. Let him use his athleticism and burst. And then Emmett Mosley's just a really good receiver. And again, look what it did for the offensive line and Javonte Williams, who was 1,200 yards plus and 11 touchdowns. It does open things up for a more explosive backfield, which, again, all the pieces are there, much like the Cowboys did, to become one of the best offenses in the game.
Yeah.
Did I mention Arch Manning's their quarterback?
Just imagine what this offense could be next year. You mentioned the two high safeties, Cam Coleman taking the top off the defense, right? Then you have just an elite, like Raleek Brown catching the ball out of the backfield. You could dump it off to him in the flat. Arch Manning can use his legs. Then you imagine Nick Townsend and the athleticism in the open field he brings. And then Ryan Wingo, boom, he's right there over the middle on a drag or a slant or something like that.
Or
and
Emmett
boom, he's
Mosley
off to the
catch a lot
races.
of passes. Because unlike the Cowboys, the third receiver for the Longhorns, I think, is a little higher level than even what the Cowboys had.
I think I agree. I think Emmett Mosley would be the third or fourth best receiver on the Cowboys right now.
Yeah, maybe. The Stanford transfer.
But the point is, this offense now goes like 6-7 weapons deep, and Arch Manning bringing that element with his legs is just another thing that you have to worry about.
And last year, how deep did the weapons go? It was Trey Wisner, Mr. Big Game Hunter.
Who did you feel confident
Arch,
throwing the ball to
after halfway? Nobody early. Maybe Parker Livingston.
He had dropsies too.
But after the halfway point, it was Arch. It was Arch.
Emmett Mosley a little bit.
Who's going to make a play?
State.
And really, for Texas, it all flipped with Arch in the second half of that Mississippi State game. They came back, won in overtime, and then the offense got to rolling. And it really was, hey, man, just put him in the shotgun, let Arch make plays. But now Arch will have a lot more help, much like Dak Prescott did this year. There you go.